Hello, dear listeners. Welcome back to this channel. So, we are done with the first chapter of the book Indian Polity by M. Laxmikant. Today, we shall start the second chapter, which is Making of the Constitution. So, let's get started. So, we start with demand for a constituent assembly. It was in 1934 that the idea of a constituent assembly for India was put forward for the first time by M.N. Roy, a pioneer of communist movement in India. In 1935, the Indian National Congress, for the first time, officially demanded a constituent assembly to frame the Constitution of India. In 1938, Jawaharlal Nehru, on behalf of the Indian National Congress, declared that the Constitution of Free India must be framed without outside interference by a constituent assembly elected on the basis of adult franchisee. The demand was finally accepted in principle by the British government in what is known as the August Offer in 1940. In 1942, Sir Stafford Cripps, a member of the cabinet, came to India with a draft proposal of the British government on the framing of an independent constitution to be adopted after the World War II. The Cripps proposals were rejected by the Muslim League, which wanted India to be divided into two autonomous states with two separate constituent assemblies. Finally, a cabinet mission was sent to India. While it rejected the idea of two constituent assemblies, it put forth a scheme for the constituent assembly which more or less satisfied the Muslim League. Now, composition of the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly was constituted in November 1946 under the scheme formulated by the Cabinet Mission Plan. The features of the scheme were: first, the total strength of the Constituent Assembly was to be 389. Of these, 296 seats were to be allotted to British India and 93 seats to the princely states. Out of 296 seats allotted to the British India, 292 members were to be drawn from the 11 governors' provinces and 4 from the 4 chief commissioners' provinces, 1 from each. Number second, each province and princely state or group of states in case of small states were to be allotted seats in proportion to their respective population. Roughly, 1 seat was to be allotted for every million population. Number third, seats allotted to each British province were to be divided among 3 principal communities: Muslims, Sikhs, and General, which included all except Muslims and Sikhs, in proportion to their population. Number fourth, the representatives of each community were to be elected by members of that community in the provincial legislative assembly, and voting was to be by the method of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote. And number fifth, the representatives of the princely states were to be nominated by the heads of the princely states. It is thus clear that the Constituent Assembly was to be a partly elected and partly nominated body. Moreover, the members were to be indirectly elected by the members of the provincial assemblies, who themselves were elected on a limited franchisee. The elections to the Constituent Assembly for 296 seats allotted to the British Indian provinces were held in July-August of 1946. The Indian National Congress won 208 seats, the Muslim League 73 seats, and the small groups and independents got the remaining 15 seats. However, the 93 seats allotted to the princely states were not filled as they decided to stay away from the Constituent Assembly. Although the Constituent Assembly was not directly elected by the people of India on the basis of adult franchisee, the assembly comprised representatives of all sections of the Indian society: Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Parsis, Anglo Indians, Indian Christians, SCs, STs, including women of all these sections. The assembly included all important personalities of India at that time, with the exception of Mahatma Gandhi. Next comes the working of the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly held its first meeting on December 9th, 1946. The Muslim League boycotted the meeting and insisted on a separate state of Pakistan. The meeting was thus attended by only 211 members. Dr. Sachidananda Sinha, the oldest member, was elected as the temporary president of the assembly, following the French practice. Later, Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected as the president of the assembly. Similarly, both H.C. Mukherjee and V.T. Krishnamachari were elected as the vice presidents of the assembly. In other words, the assembly had two vice presidents. Then comes the Objectives Resolution. On December 13, 1946, Jawaharlal Nehru moved the historic Objectives Resolution in the assembly. It laid down the fundamentals and philosophy of the constitutional structure. It read, first, this Constituent Assembly declares its firm and solemn resolve to proclaim India as an independent sovereign republic and to draw up for her future governance a constitution. Second, wherein the territories that now comprise British India, the territories that now form the Indian states, and such other parts of India as are outside India, and the states as well as other territories as are willing to be constituted into the independent sovereign India, shall be a union of them all. And third, wherein the said territories, whether with their present boundaries or with such others as may be determined by the Constituent Assembly, and thereafter according to the law of the Constitution, shall possess and retain the status of autonomous units together with residuary powers, and exercise all powers and functions of government and administration, save and except such powers and functions as are vested in or assigned to the Union, or as are inherent or implied in the Union or resulting therefrom. And fourth, wherein all power and authority of the sovereign independent India, its constituent parts and organs of government are derived from the people. And fifth, wherein shall be guaranteed and secured to all the people of India justice, social, economic, and political, equality of status, of opportunity, and before the law, freedom of thought, expression, belief, faith, worship, vocation, association, and action, subject to law and public morality. And sixth, wherein adequate safeguards shall be provided for minorities, backward and tribal areas, and depressed and other backward classes. And seventh, whereby shall be maintained the integrity of the territory of the Republic and its sovereign rights on land, sea, and air, according to justice and the law of civilized nations. And eighth, this ancient land attains its rightful and honored place in the world and makes its full and willing contribution to the promotion of world peace and the welfare of mankind. This resolution was unanimously adopted by the Assembly on January 22, 1947. It influenced the eventual shaping of the Constitution through all its subsequent stages. Its modified version forms the preamble of the present constitution. Next, we'll talk about the changes by the Independence Act. The representatives of the princely states who had stayed away from the Constituent Assembly gradually joined it. On April 28th of 1947, representatives of the six states were part of the assembly. After the acceptance of the Mountbatten Plan of June 3rd, 1947, for the partition of the country, the representatives for most of the other princely states took their seats in the assembly. The members of the Muslim League from the Indian Dominion also entered the assembly. The Indian Independence Act of 1947 made the following three changes in the position of the assembly. Number one, the assembly was made a fully sovereign body which could frame any constitution it pleased. The act empowered the assembly to abrogate or alter any law made by the British Parliament in relation to India. Number second, the assembly also became a legislative body. In other words, two separate functions were assigned to the assembly, that is, making of the constitution for free India and enacting of ordinary laws for the country. These two tasks were to be performed on separate days. Thus, the assembly became the first parliament of free India, Dominion legislature. Whenever the assembly met as the constituent body, it was chaired by Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and when it met as a legislative body, it was chaired by G.V. Mavlankar. These two functions continued till November 26, 1949, when the task of making the constitution was over. Number third, the Muslim League members hailing from the areas included in the Pakistan withdrew from the Constituent Assembly for India. Consequently, the total strength of the assembly came down to 299 as against 389 originally fixed in 1946 under the Cabinet Mission Plan. The strength of the Indian provinces, formerly British provinces, was reduced from 296 to 229, and those of the princely states from 93 to 70. The state-wise membership of the assembly, as on December 31st, 1947, is shown in table 2.4 of this chapter. Then we'll talk about other functions performed. In addition to the making of the Constitution and enacting of ordinary laws, the Constituent Assembly also performed the following functions. Number one, it ratified India's membership of the Commonwealth in May of 1949. Number second, it adopted the national flag on July 22, 1947. Number third, it adopted the national anthem on January 24 of 1950. Number fourth, it adopted the national song on January 24, 1950. Number fifth, it elected Dr. Rajendra Prasad as the first President of India on January 24, 1950. In all, the Constituent Assembly had 11 sessions over 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days. The constitution makers had gone through the constitutions of about 60 countries, and the draft constitution was considered for 114 days. The total expenditure incurred on making the constitution amounted to 64 lakh. On January 24, 1950, the Constituent Assembly held its final session. It, however, did not end and continued as the Provisional Parliament of India from January 26, 1950 till the formation of new Parliament after the first general elections in 1951-52. Then let's talk about the committees of the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly appointed a number of committees to deal with different tasks of constitution making. Out of these, 8 were major committees and the others were minor committees. The names of these committees and their chairmen are given below. So let's first talk about the major committees. Number 1, Union Powers Committee, and the chairman was Jawaharlal Nehru. Union Constitution Committee. It was chaired again by Jawaharlal Nehru. Number 3, Provincial Constitution Committee, chaired by Sardar Patel. Number 4 was the Drafting Committee. It was chaired by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Number 5 was the Advisory Committee on Fundamental Rights, Minorities, and Tribal and Excluded Areas. And the chairman was Sardar Patel. This committee had the following 5 subcommittees. A. Fundamental Rights Subcommittee, chaired by J.B. Kriplani. B. Minorities Subcommittee, chaired by H.C. Mukherjee. C. Northeast Frontier Tribal Areas and Assam Excluded and Partially Excluded Areas Subcommittee, chaired by Gopinath Bardolio. D. Excluded and Partially Excluded Areas other than those in Assam Subcommittee, and chaired by A.V. Thakkar. And E. Northwest Frontier Tribal Areas Subcommittee. Then we come to the 6th major committee, which was the Rules of Procedure Committee, chaired by Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Number 7th was the States Committee, which was the committee for negotiating with states, and it was chaired by Jawaharlal Nehru. Number 8 was the Steering Committee. It was chaired by Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Then let's talk about the minor committees along with their chairman. First was the Finance and Staff Committee, chaired by Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Number 2 was the Credentials Committee, chaired by Aladi Krishnamaswamy Iyer. Number 3 was the House Committee, chaired by P. Pattabhi Sitaramaiah. Number 4 was the Order of Business Committee, chaired by K. M. Munshi. Number 5 was the Ad hoc Committee on the National Flag, chaired by Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Number 6 was the Committee on the Functions of the Constituent Assembly, chaired by G.V. Mavlankar. Number 7 was the Ad hoc Committee on the Supreme Court, chaired by S. Varadachari, who was not an assembly member. Number 8 was the Committee on Chief Commissioners Provinces, chaired by P. Pattabhi Sitaramaiah. Number 9 was the Expert Committee on the Financial Provisions of the Union Constitution, and it was chaired by Nalini Ranjan Sarkar, again not an assembly member. Number 10th was the Linguistic Provinces Commission, chaired by S.K. Dhar, again not an assembly member. Number 11th was the Special Committee to examine the draft constitution, chaired by Jawaharlal Nehru. Number 12th was the Press Gallery Committee, chaired by Usha Nath Sen. And number 13 was the Ad hoc Committee on Citizenship, chaired by S. Varadachari, again not an assembly member. Now let's talk about the Drafting Committee. Among all the committees of the Constituent Assembly, the most important committee was the Drafting Committee, set up on August of 29, 1947. It was this committee that was entrusted with the task of preparing a draft of the new constitution. It consisted of 7 members. They were, number 1, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was the chairman of the drafting committee. Number 2 was N. Gopalaswamy Iyengar. Number 3 was Aladi Krishnamaswamy Iyer. Number 4 was Dr. K. M. Munshi. Number 5, Sayyid Muhammad Sadullah. Number 6, N. Madhava Rao. He replaced B.L. Mittar, who resigned due to ill health. Number 7th was T.T. Krishnamachari. He replaced V.P. Khaitan, who died in 1948. The drafting committee, after taking into consideration the proposals of the various committees, prepared the first draft of the Constitution of India, which was published in February 1948. The people of India were given 8 months to discuss the draft and propose amendments. In the light of the public comments, criticisms, and suggestions, the drafting committee prepared a second draft, which was published October 1948. The drafting committee took less than 6 months to prepare its draft. In all, it sat only for 141 days. Now let's talk about the enactment of the Constitution. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar introduced the final draft of the Constitution in the Assembly on November 4, 1948, for the first reading. The Assembly had a general discussion on it for 5 days, that is till November 9 of 1948. The second reading, which was the clause-by-clause consideration, started on November 15th of 1948 and ended on October 17 of 1949. During this stage, as many as 7,653 amendments were proposed and 2,473 were actually discussed in the Assembly. The third reading of the draft started on November 14 of 1949. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar moved a motion, the Constitution as settled by the Assembly be passed. The motion on draft Constitution was declared as passed on November 26, 1949 and received the signatures of the members and the President. Out of a total of 299 members of the Assembly, only 284 were actually present on that day and signed the Constitution. This is also the date mentioned in the preamble as the date on which the people of India in the Constituent Assembly adopted, enacted, and gave to themselves this Constitution. The Constitution, as adopted on November 26 of 1949, contained a preamble, 395 articles, and 8 schedules. The preamble was enacted after the entire Constitution was already enacted. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the then Law Minister, piloted the draft Constitution in the Assembly. He took a very prominent part in the deliberations of the Assembly. He was known for his logical, forceful, and persuasive arguments on the floor of the Assembly. He is recognized as the father of the Constitution of India. This brilliant writer, constitutional expert, undisputed leader of the scheduled castes, and the chief architect of the Constitution of India is also known as a modern Manu. Now let's talk of the enforcement of the Constitution. Some provisions of the Constitution pertaining to citizenship, elections, provisional parliament, temporary and transitional provisions, and short title contained in articles like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 60, 324, 366, 367, 379, 380, 388, 391, 392, and 393 came into force on November 26, 1949 itself. The remaining provisions, that is the major part of the Constitution, came into force on January 26, 1950. This day is referred to in the Constitution as the date of its commencement and celebrated as the Republic Day. January 26 was specifically chosen as the date of commencement of the Constitution because of its historical importance. It was on this day in 1930 that Purna Swaraj Day was celebrated, following the resolution of the Lahore session of December 1929 of the Indian National Congress. With the commencement of the Constitution, the Indian Independence Act of 1947 and the Government of India Act of 1935, with all enactments amending or supplementing the later act, were repealed. The abolition of Privy Council Jurisdiction Act of 1949 was, however, continued. Now, let's talk about the Experts Committee of the Congress. While elections to the Constituent Assembly were still in progress, on July 8, 1946, the Congress Party, the Indian National Congress, appointed an experts committee for the purpose of preparing material for the Constituent Assembly. This committee consisted of the following members. Number first, Jawaharlal Nehru, the chairman. Number second was M. Asif Ali. Number third was K. M. Munshi. Number fourth was N. Gopalaswamy Iyengar. Number fifth was K. T. Shah. Number sixth was D. R. Gadgil. Number seventh was Humayun Kabir. And number eighth was K. Santhanam. Later, on the chairman's proposal, it was resolved that Krishna Kriplani be co-opted as member and convener of the committee. The committee had two sittings, the first at New Delhi from July 20 to 22 of 1946 and the second at Bombay from August 15 to 17 of 1946. Apart from a number of notes prepared by its members, the committee discussed the procedure to be adopted by the Constituent Assembly, the question of the appointment of various committees, and the draft of a resolution on the objectives of the Constitution to be moved during the first session of the Constituent Assembly. On the role played by this committee in the making of the Constitution, Granville Austin, a British constitutional expert, observed, "It was the Congress Experts Committee that set India on the road to her present constitution. The committee members, working within the framework of the Cabinet Mission scheme, made general suggestions about autonomous areas, the powers of provincial governments and the centre, and about such issues as the princely states and the amending power. They also drafted a resolution closely resembling the objectives resolution." Now we talk about the criticism of the Constituent Assembly. The critics have criticized the Constituent Assembly on various grounds. These are as follows. Number one, not a representative body. The critics have argued that the Constituent Assembly was not a representative body, as its members were not directly elected by the people of India on the basis of universal adult franchising. Number second, not a sovereign body. The critics maintained that the Constituent Assembly was not a sovereign body, as it was created by the proposals of the British government. Further, they said that the Assembly held its sessions with the permission of the British government. Number third, time consuming. According to the critics, the Constituent Assembly took unduly long time to make the Constitution. They stated that the framers of the American Constitution took only 4 months to complete their work. In this context, Naziruddin Ahmad, a member of the Constituent Assembly, coined a new name for the drafting committee. To show his contempt for it, he called it a drifting committee. The fourth criticism was dominated by Congress. The critics charged that the Constituent Assembly was dominated by the Congress Party. Granville Austin, an American constitutional expert, remarked, "The Constituent Assembly was a one-party body in an essentially one-party country. The Assembly was the Congress and the Congress was India." So the fifth criticism is lawyer-politician domination. It is also maintained by the critics that the Constituent Assembly was dominated by the lawyers and politicians. They pointed out that other sections of the society were not sufficiently represented. This, to them, is the main reason for the bulkiness and complicated language of the Constitution. Number six, dominated by Hindus. According to some critics, the Constituent Assembly was a Hindu dominated body. Lord Viscount Simon called it a body of Hindus. Similarly, Winston Churchill commented that the Constituent Assembly represented only one major community in India. Now let's go through some important facts. Fact number one: elephant was adopted as the symbol or seal of the Constituent Assembly. Fact second: Sir B. N. Rao was appointed as the constitutional advisor, legal advisor to the Constituent Assembly. Fact number third: H.V.R. Iyengar was the secretary to the Constituent Assembly. Fact fourth: S.N. Mukherjee was the chief draftsman of the Constitution in the Constituent Assembly. Fact number fifth was Prem Bihari Narayan Raizada was the calligrapher of the Indian Constitution. The original Constitution was handwritten by him in a flowing italic style. Number 6. The original version was beautified and decorated by artists from Shantiniketan, including Nandlal Bose and Bihar Ram Manohar Sinha. Number 7. Bihar Ram Manohar Sinha illuminated, beautified, and ornamented the original preamble calligraphed by Prem Bihari Narayan Raizada. Number 8. The calligraphy of the Hindi version of the original constitution was done by Vasant Krishnan Vaidya and elegantly decorated and illuminated by Nandlal Bose. The last topic of the chapter is Hindi text of the constitution. Originally, the Constitution of India did not make any provision with respect to an authoritative text of the constitution in the Hindi language. Later, a provision in this regard was made by the 58th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1987. This amendment inserted a new article, Article 394A, in the last part of the Constitution. Part 12. This article contains the following provisions. Number 1. The President shall cause to be published under his authority A. The translation of the Constitution in Hindi language, the modifications which are necessary to bring in conformity with the language, style, and terminology adopted in the authoritative texts of the central acts in Hindi can be made in it. All the amendments of the Constitution made before such publication should be incorporated in it. B. The translation in Hindi of every amendment of the Constitution made in English. Second, the translation of the Constitution and its every amendment published shall be construed to have the same meaning as the original text in English. If any difficulty arises in this matter, the President shall cause the Hindi text to be revised suitably. Point number 3, the translation of the Constitution and its every amendment published shall be deemed to be, for all purposes, its authoritative text in Hindi. So with that, we come to the end of chapter 2, which was Making of the Constitution. Hope you liked today's lesson. So we'll meet next time with the third chapter from the book. Till then, take care and thank you.